Hello? Did everybody please sit down as a small child? And he did everything that he could to save as many of us as he could. He's credited with rescuing tens of thousands to 100,000 Jews. In addition, there were some colleagues of his, like Karl Lutz, the Swiss diplomat, who also rescued tens of thousands of Jews. In fact, my father was in a building that Karl Lutz protected. It was called the Glassman. You'll hear about that. And many of these rescuers, who we're going to hear about today, were individuals, and they were self-motivated, they're extremely creative people, besides being heroes. Hero is kind of a stereotype. The last thing that I'd like to say before I introduce our speakers is that the Wallenberg mission and many of these other missions that rescued tens of thousands to 100,000 Jews, hundreds of thousands actually, wouldn't have happened if it wasn't some Jews who were the Jewish Wallenbergs. And we have a PowerPoint presentation that will name them, show their photographs so we can connect to these important messages. We're going to speak about history today, to honor people, but the reason why we're doing it is not only to honor people or to remember them from the past, but to shape the history of the future, to make sure that if again there are dark times like there were during the Holocaust, there will be individuals who step up to the challenge. They will not wait for a government or the United Nations or some other organization to do something, but they will really be what Judaism says man is. We are created in God's image, but Tselem Elokim, and they really will be the giant. Rosh Gadol, like I say in Hebrew. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Michael Ben-Ari, who is giving the opening talk.
Thank you. אני רוצה להמשיך בדברים שבעצם פתח בהם לארי. אני רוצה קודם כל, במשפט ראשון, לברך את עצמנו שיש לנו פה את לארי, שהוא היוזם והמדרבן. הוא כבר דיבר איתנו על העניין הזה לפני כשנה, ואנחנו שמחים שהיום אנחנו נמצאים כאן, ואני חושב, אם אתה מדבר על העתיד, אז אני חושב שהאירוע הזה שאנחנו מקיימים כאן עכשיו, הוא לא בשביל ראול ולנברג, הוא קודם כל בשבילנו ובשביל העולם כולו.
Ali, could you, Ali Yosef is going to be translating into English.
First of all, I'd like to thank Larry, who spoke to us about this about a year ago. Now that we're here and we're actually having this event here. Secondly, I would like to say that what we're doing tonight is not for Raoul Wallenberg, but it's first and foremost for us.
הדמות הזאת של ראול ולנברג היא לימוד מאוד מאוד עצום, שאני רוצה לדבר עליה בכמה משפטים. עם ישראל יש לו תפקיד בעולם של העברת מסר של קיום העולם. יש לנו מטרה לא של מיסיון, לא שכולם יהיו יהודים, אין כזאת מטרה בעם היהודי. ישנו כן מסר לתקן את העולם, לתקן את העולם מבחינת היחסים החברתיים בין בני אדם. לתקן את העולם מבחינת מה שאנחנו קוראים 7 מצוות בני נוח, שאחד הדברים החשובים ביותר שם זה העניין של לא תרצח, מלבד היחסים החברתיים. הנצרות לדוגמה, ככה אומר הרמב"ם, שהפיצה את התנ"ך בכל העולם כולו, לקחה למקומות הכי מרוחקים בעולם את המצוות המאוד מאוד בסיסיות של לא לעשוק את הדל, של לתת לשכיר את שכרו ביומו, וכמובן את הדברים הכבירים והגדולים יותר.
The personality of Raoul Wallenberg on the one hand is a tragic personality, what happened, and what he wanted, what the minister would like to say is that Judaism emphasizes the existence of the world and how the world should behave, in the sense that we have a mission, not a mission to convert anybody, but a mission to try and correct social injustices, especially with the idea of the 7 commandments of Noah, which emphasize the idea of thou shalt not kill, and the fact that Christianity took some of these very basic principles and spread them throughout the world, the Rambam and other great Jewish philosophers sees as a blessing.
כן, ההגדרה, יש הגדרה ביהדות הלכתית כמעט, ככה על פי הרמב"ם, של חסיד אומות העולם. ואנחנו היום נשמח להגדיר את ראול ולנברג כמודל המשמעותי ביותר של חסיד אומות העולם, אבל אני רוצה להשוות אותו מבחינה היסטורית לדמות אחרת, שבהחלט הוא יכול להידמות אליה והוא יתכבד באותה הדמיה. אני רוצה לדבר על מי שהצילה את המנהיג הכי גדול שהיה לעם ישראל מעולם, והדמות שלו אפילו מככבת בפרלמנטים בעולם. מדבר על משה רבנו, שנגזרה עליו הגזרה, החוק היה חוק של רוע, של אכזריות, וזה היה החוק שקיימו אותו כל התושבים של המצרים. מלבד מי שהיה הכי מצופה ממנה שתעשה את זה, זו בת פרעה, שברגע המכריע, כשהיא עומדת בפני המבחן הזה, האם להישמע לחוק הנוראי, הזוועתי של השלכת תינוקות אל מותם, באה ופורעת את החוק בפני אביה שהוא מחוקק, ומסמלת בכך את הטוב של העולם. לא לחינם, בדברי הימים וחז"ל, מכנים את הבת של פרעה בתיה. היא הבת של השם. היא באיזשהו מקום פה התחברה לדבר השם בעולם, לדבר האלוקים בעולם, לדבר של בורא עולם, להילחם ברצח, להילחם בעוול, להילחם במציאות המאוד מאוד מעוותת שהייתה בעצם נחלתם של הכל, ואסור לנו לשכוח. ראול ולנברג חי בזמן שזה היה טבעי, שזה היה נורמטיבי, לשחוט יהודים, לרדוף אותם, להשפיל אותם, והוא כנגד הזרם, כנגד כל הסיכויים, עושה את הבלתי מצופה ממנו, וגם כביכול את הבלתי אפשרי. הוא היה יכול לשבת בבית ולא לעשות כלום, לא לרצוח וגם לא להציל, אבל הוא לא בחר לשבת על הגדר, אלא בחר להתערב ולהשליך את חייו מנגד, ובזה בעצם הוא הוכיח שהעולם הולך לקראת תיקונו.
In Judaism, we have an idea called Hasid Umot HaOlam, righteous Gentile, which there's a legal explanation to this. And what I would like to explain is how I would like to compare the image of Raoul Wallenberg with a person who saved the leader of the Jewish people at another very dark period in history, who saved Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, and we're talking about the daughter of Pharaoh. It would have been least expected of her to do such an act. And she goes and she saves Moses, and to the point that the Bible calls her afterwards the daughter of God, Batya, and no longer just the daughter of that evil power. In the same way, Raoul Wallenberg, he went against the current. By going against the current where he could have stayed at home, he decided not simply not to kill, but he decided to get up, volunteer, and intervene with what was taking place, and to do that by risking his life and having no concern for his life, and going out to save people just go out to save people, for that was his ideal.
אני חושב שהדרך הדרשה, אמרנו שבתיה זה בת השם, אז בשם שלו, ראול, אפשר למצוא גם כן שהוא רואה אל, ואפשר לראות פה את הייתה התגלות אלוקית. ואני אסיים במשפט אחד חשוב. האירוע הזה שאנחנו עושים כאן עכשיו, לזכרו של ראול ולנברג, כפי שהזכרתי בתחילת דבריי ואני גם מסיים בהם, זה לא בשבילו. זה קודם כל בשביל הכרת הטוב שלנו והחובה שלנו, ודבר שני, אני חושב שהדמות הזאת היא לא דמות מופת לעם ישראל, היא דמות מופת לעולם כולו, וברגע שהדמות המופת הזאת הופכת לעולם כולו, היא מוליכה, הדמות הזאת מוליכה את העולם לקראת התיקון שלו, לקראת חיסול הזוועות, חיסול ההתעללות, חיסול של דברים שחווינו אותם בעבר ואנחנו חווים אותם עד היום, של פגיעה באחר עם כל ההשלכות שלה. אז לשם כך אנחנו מתכנסים כאן. אני מקווה שהאירוע המאוד מכובד, אומנם המצומצם שנמצא כאן, יהיה תחילתו של דרך לקראת חקיקה שתציג פה עוד מעט מרינה סלוטקין, ואני מקווה שגם עם נציגים מהעולם כולו, שיראו בו דמות מופת של אותה התגלות אלוקית של תיקון העולם במלכות שדי, תיקון העולם של קבלת אותם 7 מצוות בני נוח, שהאבי אבות שבהם זה הלא תרצח, והחובה לעמוד על דם רעך, לא תעמוד על דם רעך, שאתה רואה את החבר שלך תובע, אתה צריך לעשות ככל שביכולתך לבוא ולהציל, וזו הדמות של ולנברג.
In the same way that the name Batya, the daughter of God, so also in the name Ra'ul we can see in the language of the name the shepherd of God, Ro'el, and what we are doing today is not for us, as again, just to honor Raoul Wallenberg, but for us it's an obligation. The whole idea is that the way we see Raoul Wallenberg as an example, and to the Jewish people, and to the world at large, and he represents the idea of correcting the way of the world, to bring the world to an understanding of this idea of justice, this idea of caring, and by this he corrects the whole way of the world. And therefore what we're doing today we believe will end up being a whole movement. There's a law that is being prepared that is going to be presented by Miriam Savotskin, and we hope that this law will show, and to the Jewish people, and to the world at large, the example of Raoul Wallenberg, and how this example can affect the whole movement in the future.
משפט אחד נוסף, נזכיר פה גם את האחרים שאנחנו מזכירים פה, את חבר הכנסת אילן קוק, דוד ז'בוטינסקי וסמואל ברלין, שמן הסתם ידברו עליהם בהמשך, שגם הם עסקו בזמן השואה בהפיכה מחשבתית וארגונית בארצות הברית למען יהדות אירופה שעמדה אז על גיא ההרים.
Also, it's important that I would like to recall the names of Hillel Koch, Ari Jabotinsky, and Samuel Merlin, and others we will talk about. But they did a revolution in the way of thinking of the time, when the ideas was, the consensus was not to create waves, and they went against that idea. And we come here also in order to remember what they did and to learn from their example.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Michael Ben-Ari. We're going to introduce we have a number of ambassadors and diplomats with us, which is very encouraging. And before I introduce the ambassador of Switzerland, I'd like for you people to look at these paintings. This painting is about things that happened in Switzerland. We heard about some of the negative actions of the Swiss government during the Holocaust, just like many other governments had very negative actions. But we don't hear anything about this, that there was a major grassroots protest in Switzerland in the middle of 1944. Huge press campaigns, about 400 articles about our brothers and sisters in Europe. The Swiss churches, which might have been anti-Semitic before or not, we don't know. Many of the churches were. During this time, they said, we are our brother's keepers. And this is what led to a tremendous noise around the world, which resulted in President Roosevelt and Churchill making sure that the Hungarian regent is going to stop the transports from Budapest to Auschwitz, which every day took 12,000 of us, including my relatives, to the death camps. As a result of the Swiss press campaign, the train stopped for a while, and that's what enabled Raoul Wallenberg to come down to a more sober Budapest, and that's what allowed Swiss diplomat Carlotz also to work. So I'd like to, with this introduction, introduce His Excellency Ambassador Walter Hefner, the Swiss ambassador.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, dear members of Knesset, honored survivors of the Holocaust, dear fellow ambassadors, members of the diplomatic community, dear guests. As individuals, we can consider it a blessing that usually we prefer to look at the sunny side of our past instead of the dark side. As a society and as a state, we cannot afford this luxury. The state must look at the dark sides of its past in a thorough, candid, and honest way, if it wants to fully understand what happened and why bad things happened. If a society, a state, does not understand its past, it runs the risk that the same mistakes are repeated in the future. It took Switzerland a long time to fully come to terms with its role in World War II. It was only in the mid-90s, in fact, some 50 years after the end of World War II and the Holocaust, and under pressure from the outside world, that Switzerland was finally capable to fully admit that some wrong choices had been taken and that grave mistakes were committed during this time. mistakes that cost the lives of many innocent Jews. In 1995, the president of the Swiss Confederation, Caspar Williger, in a speech before the Federal Assembly on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II, declared on the topic of Switzerland's refugee policy the following. We made at that time wrong choices based on much too narrow an understanding of the national interest. The Federal Council regrets that most deeply and apologizes for it, knowing well that in the last analysis such a fault is inexcusable. Only years later, in 2003, the Swiss Parliament passed a new law that finally made it possible to cancel penal sentences imparted to people convicted of having provided assistance to refugees who had been persecuted by the Nazi regime. To this day, some 120 women and men have been rehabilitated. In 2004, Switzerland has introduced the Holocaust Memorial Day on the national level. It takes place every year on the 27th of January. If we gathered today to honor the memory of Raoul Wallenberg, Karl Lutz, and many other personalities, we pay tribute to men and women who had the courage to take their own decisions in a dark and cruel time. Let us hope that the memory of those people will inspire future generations to stand up against any crime against humanity. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. Before we go on to our next statement, I'd like to point out this individual who was one of the Jewish Wallenbergs. He has a name. In Israel, we say that everybody has a name. He also has a name, George Mantello. He was a Hungarian-Romanian Jew working in Geneva for the El Salvador embassy. Tens of thousands of Jews were alive because of him. He's the one who released through writers the information about Auschwitz. Because of him, all these Swiss headlines appeared, and because of him, the Swiss theologian, Pastor Vogt, started to give sermons and wrote books about the evil that's happening in Europe, and this is what started to dampen a little bit the murder that was happening in the rest of the world. I'd like to introduce at this time, we are going to make a small change, if you forgive me, because we started a bit late. It's my honor to introduce Deputy Minister Ayub Kara.
Thank you very much. אני מדבר בעברית. ראשית כל, אני רוצה להודות לך על באת והרמת מפעל שלדעתי בהמשך מפעל שאין חשוב ממנו שצריך לעשות ולקדש אותו. כי אין דבר יותר קדוש מלהעלות זכרו של האיש אולי שהכי הרבה השאיר חותם על האנושות בהקשר לאנושיות שבו ובתקופה הכי חשוכה אולי של עם ישראל. ואני מאוד מתקומם ומשתומם שעד עצם היום הזה לא מצאו אנשים להנציח את זכרו. זה לדעתי דבר שהוא לא מסמל חיוביות במובן של המילה ובלשון המעטה. ואני חושב שראול ולנברג מהווה בעיניי סמל לחיקוי. אני לא יהודי, אבל אני אוהב יהודים יותר מאשר הם אוהבים את עצמם. וזה היה משותף ביני לבינו. וזה אני בריש גלי, גם אם תשאלו את הדרוזים יגידו לכם הוא יהודי, וכששואלים את היהודים אומרים עליי שאני דרוזי, ויש לי בעיה. אז אני חושב שאני בא מבית שבעצם גם בתחילת המאה הקודמת עשה הכל כדי לסייע ולשמור את היישוב היהודי כאן באזור הזה, אבל לפני כן אני בא משושלת של יתרו. מהתקופה ההיא עד עצם היום הזה, בבית ראשון ובבית שני, אנחנו דאגנו ועשינו רבות לסייע לקהילה היהודית שהייתה במזרח התיכון. אני חושב
הסיוע שקיבלו היהודים מראול ולנברג, ראוי שמדינת ישראל, וראוי עוד יותר שכנסת ישראל תיקח את המפעל הזה שבעיניי צריך להיות, וכמובן עם לארי, עם חבר הכנסת בן ארי, וכמובן סופה ידידתי מרינה. מרינה ידידתי, שאני יודע כמה שהדברים הללו חשובים לה, ישבתי לידה מספר שנים. אנחנו ביחד צריכים לעשות הכל כדי שהעתיד ידע את העבר, כי בלי עבר אין עתיד. וכשרוצים להסתכל על העתיד, לא שוכחים את העבר, אבל מסתכלים אל העתיד. ככה צריך להיות התיאוריה והתורה. כי בלי עבר לא מעריכים נכון את העתיד. ואין לי אינדיקציה להעריך את העתיד מבלי העבר. זה הסיסמה וזה המשוואה שצריכה לעמוד לנגד עינינו, כי אי אפשר לדעת מה ילד יום, ובמיוחד שאנחנו חיים עדיין בעולם שלא יודע לשמר או לשמור על מיעוטים או על הדעה האחרת בתוכו, וגם באזור שהוא לא יודע לקבל אנשים מבחינה מספרית פחות ממנו, והרוב הדורסני הזה נמצא בכל מקום לצערי בעולם, וצריכים לדעת איך אנחנו שסבלנו מזה כמדינה וכעם פה, צריכים לדעת איך לשמר את השוני, לשמר את הגישה שצריכים להתחשב בשונה, ותדע שגר היית במצרים, תמיד. חשוב ללכת על פי 7 מצוות נוח, אני חושב שזה קונסנזוס בעולם הזה, אני חושב שזה דבר מאוד חשוב. אני יוצא מחר יחד עם קבוצת רבנים לטורקיה לפגוש אחד מהשייחים החשובים של טורקיה, כדי להביא למצב ליצור אווירה מאוד חשובה לנו, אווירה טובה בין שתי המדינות שנפגמה קצת בתקופה האחרונה, וזה בראייה דתית. אני במקרה נמצא כאיש פוליטי יחידי בתוכם, אבל כל השאר הם רבנים ואנשי דת, שחלק מהם מהסנהדרין יהיו, ואני אעשה הכל בכל מקום. אני גם נפגש עם האפיפיור שבוע הבא, בראייה שאני לא יהודי, אבל אני לא צריך להרים את הדגל, להגיד אני לא יהודי כל הזמן, אבל חשוב לי להדגיש שאני לא יהודי בגלל זה שאני רוצה לבוא ממבט כמה שיהודים טובים, כמה שיהודים הם שוויוניים, כמה שיהודים זה מדינה של דמוקרטיה וזכויות אדם. חשוב לי להבליט את זה שאני לא יהודי, נמצא בממשלת ישראל, בכנסת ישראל, וכדי שלא יסתכלו כל הזמן על היהודים וכאילו נמצא פה פרטהייד, איפה שאני מסתובב מנסים להדביק להם את זה באזור הזה. לכן לארי, אני גאה בך, גאה באנשים שהרימו את המפעל הזה, ומי ידע, ואת העבר הזה, הלא רחוק, לא נראה בחיינו ולנצח לפחות. תודה רבה. אתה יכול לתרגם.
First of all, again, I want to thank Larry for trying to start off this enterprise. Secondly, in this very dark period of time, I don't understand so much how it's possible that we've not yet found the appropriate way in how to internalize the name of Raoul Wallenberg and other people who worked in that period of time. That does not suggest anything positive, and that is something we have to definitely correct. I see Raoul Wallenberg as a model, as a role model, and even though I'm not Jewish, I come from the Druze, we come from the descendants of Yitro, of Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. If I can just add that he could also be considered a righteous Gentile, because he also was opposed to the killing of the Jewish babies. And the state of Israel and the Knesset of Israel have to look at this enterprise as something that it has to bring to the whole of the people, because without knowing our past, we cannot plan our future, we cannot even evaluate our future, and we can't go forward, especially at a time that there are still trampling majorities we do not give minorities their rights. We have to know how to give the example, how you can look after the differences, an attitude that will allow you to look at differences in a humane way, as comes through the 7 Noahide commandments that stress the basic humane obligations from human to human. Next week, even though I'm not Jewish, I'll be going out with a group of rabbis to Turkey, which will have this idea of trying to have a meeting between religious people on the Muslim side and religious people on the Jewish side, and how through a religious perspective try and find something that is in common. And I'm proud of you, Larry. I'm proud of you for the starting of this enterprise, and hopefully we'll have the power to carry it on.
אנחנו, לארי, רק מילה, אנחנו מרגע זה כולנו ולנברגים. אנחנו בתנועת הוולנברגים, כולנו. לידיעתך, כן?
אבל עוד מילה, אנחנו, כולנו יהודים, שיהודי אומר, איש שמחפש אמת, צדק, אוקיי, איש ישר, ואז אתה יותר יהודי מהרבה אנשים שאני מכיר. Okay, our next speaker is going to be, we made some changes because of late start. Is His Excellency Ambassador Szent-Györgyi Zoltán from Hungary, the country where I was born a long, long time ago.
Thank you very much. Honorable members of the Knesset, Honorable Deputy Minister, dear colleagues, and friends. First of all, I would like to thank you for your invitation for this prestigious event. For a Hungarian ambassador, it's not only an honor, but a moral duty to be here, especially in the building of the Knesset. I would like to share with you 3 of my thoughts. The first, that simple fact, I was born in 1966, 22 years after the horrible year of 1944. In Holocaust studies terminology, I think my generation is the 3rd generation. For us, the Second World War, the Holocaust, is history what we haven't witnessed personally. We have to understand the ununderstandable through history books, through literature, through arts, through the stories of our parents and grandparents. The never again, for me, for us, means that although it's totally absurd that the Holocaust can happen again, it's already happened. And it was totally absurd, out of human capacity to understand, even when it really happened. Today, we can follow in several Holocaust studies centers of the world how this horrible event was built up step by step, month after month, year after year, from the numerus clausus laws until Auschwitz. It was a process. I have 2 children. If they will choose to live in my country, in Hungary, I want to do all my best to avoid even the very first steps of this process, for the sake of my own children and but for the sake of my own country. The second of my thoughts, that I don't think that anybody can do enough to achieve these goals. It's a constant fight for the better world. If it's not about the Jews, maybe it's about the Romas or other minorities. So I am very far from being satisfied. Anyway, in a very humble manner, in a very short way, I would like to summarize what we have done until today. We have our own excellent Holocaust Studies Center of the Pava Street. We included in an appropriate way the Holocaust into the study program of the secondary schools. Hungary was the chair of the Task Force of Holocaust Education and Remembrance through in 2006. We have an excellent cooperation with the Yad Vashem. Every year, history teachers come to Israel for 1-2 weeks. The Hungarian court banned the extreme right organization Hungarian Garda, and the government tries to adopt a law to ban the hate speech. In Budapest, Raoul Wallenberg is honorary citizen. We have a street named after him. We have a memorial in the 13th district named after him. We have a statue in the 2nd district. And we have a secondary school named after Raoul Wallenberg. And the third of my thoughts is, let me tell you that I always wanted to understand, even in my childhood, the human nature, how it is that some of us become mass murderers and killers, and others rescuers and heroes. These qualities born with you, or is it a mere chance, or the education, the family, the influence of the right friends? On what depends whether you can seize the appropriate moment or you run away? If you see a little bit closer the life of heroes, in this very case is the life of Raoul Wallenberg, before his heroic act, we can't see anything special. The young man is trying to find his way in life. Other savers, like Per Laska, Angelo Rotta, or Sousa Mendes, they were in some cases simple public servants until the moment came. I would highlight a little bit Sousa Mendes. He acted against the will of his superiors. He could close his eye, follow the orders, and run away. Instead, he stayed and saved thousands, maybe tens of thousands lives. He chose to follow not the failing human laws, he respected a higher law, the divinal one. I have already spoken to Larry about my plan. I will try to convince my authorities to inaugurate the commemorative panel in the building of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Budapest, reminding us those foreign diplomats who understood the difference between the right and the wrong, and whose example honors my profession, the diplomatic profession. Thank you very much for your attention.
Before we move on to the next speech, I'd like to say a couple of very short things. I don't want to take up much time because we're really running a bit late. You and I, Mr. Ambassador, we discussed the possibility that Hungary is also going to memorialize the Jewish Wallenbergs, who very few people unfortunately hear about. If it wasn't for these people, it's about 5-6 people, I probably wouldn't be alive. Hundreds of thousands of people would be alive. The state of Israel doesn't recognize them, which is much to my shame. With all the speech about the Holocaust, we managed certain parts of it to excise and to censor and to leave out. Also Hungary has apparently done that also either through ignorance or through lack of will, and Hungary has a special obligation because many times we had to be rescued from fellow Hungarians who were evil. I myself am here because a fellow Hungarian chose to save me, a Christian family. And the world is not, maybe one of the important lessons through all this discussion is the world is not black and white. There is black and white and gray and many things in between. I'd like to call upon, Marina, you have a little bit of time because I'd like to call on diplomats first if it's all right. It would be all right? Sir, okay? Maze? Yeshivat Siya. Okay, then I'm going to call on Marina, but before Solodnik, a member of the Knesset, but I'd like to say one word about this. We hear the word Wallenberg, but we coined, and I take responsibility for it, the word Wallenbergs, to make it generic. Wallenberg represents, my daughter Karen is next to me, she studies psychologist, I guess, what is it called? Jung would call this? A prototype, an archetype, a typical person. Paul Lutz, Aristide Sousa Mendes, Hillel Koop, George Mantello, Rabbi Michael Ber Weissmandl, Gizzy Fleischmann, Rabbi Solomon Schoenfeld, Sugihara, Feng Shenhuo, the Chinese diplomat. They all represent, and others who I may not remember on the spur of the moment, they are all Wallenbergs, and hopefully if the Knesset does something, and hopefully it will about the individual who might be called the Wallenbergs or something like this, so nobody's left out, and we can really see there's a genetic pattern that it's not one individual, but a number of individuals like that. And if you understand that pattern, we can develop through our education system, which is sorely lacking in many things, people like them. We can teach them to be honorable individuals who can stand up and they have to be counted. I'd like to call upon you, Marina.
So, right to Jim. Good afternoon. I'm very privileged to sit here together with you in Knesset from several countries. Okay. אני יכולה. לכם שיותר מ5 שנים אני מתעסקת בנושא הנצחת הזיכרון של ראול ולנברג במדינת ישראל. הגעתי לנושא הזה בגלל שאני מטפלת בניצולי שואה. אני אישית דור שני למשפחת ניצולי שואה, אבא וסבא מאוקראינה, ובגלל זה כל הנושא חשוב לי ויקר לי, ואני העברתי כמה חוקים במדינת ישראל בתמיכה של ניצולי שואה, והגעתי לנושא ולנברג יותר מ5 שנים. ולהפתעתי, כשאני חיברתי את החוק, הצעת חוק זיכרון השואה והגבורה, יום ראול ולנברג וחסידי אומות העולם, החוק הזה אני לא יכולה להעביר, לא בכנסת 16, לא בכנסת 17 ולא בכנסת 18.
I'd like to say that I've been involved now for over 5 years with this law about Raoul Wallenberg. Being a second generation survivor of the Holocaust, my grandparents from the Ukraine, I've come in front of seems to be an obstacle that this law I haven't been able to pass through neither the 16th or 17th Knesset.
כי פעם האחרונה שאני ניסיתי להעביר את החוק הזה, זה היה ב2 בדצמבר 2009, והחוק נפל, ואתם צריכים לדעת איך הוא נפל. 60 נגד, 20 פלוס בעד. אז אופוזיציה הייתה בעד, וקואליציה הייתה נגד.
The last time I tried to pass this law was on the 2nd of December, and unfortunately the law fell on a vote of 60 against 24. The government voted against the law, and only the opposition voted for the law.
כן, ואני חושבת שיש משמעות וחשיבות לשם ולנברג, לזיכרון ולנברג, ליום חסידי אומות העולם שאני רוצה לעשות ביום הולדת ב4 באוגוסט של ראול ולנברג למדינת ישראל, בגלל שהוא, כל משפחה יהודית שניצלה בשואה, מאחורי עומד חסיד אומות העולם. וראול ולנברג זה התגלמותו של כל חסידי אומות העולם. אז בגלל זה חשבתי שקשר ליום הולדתו זה קשר מאוד חשוב.
The idea was to use the day of Raoul Wallenberg, the day of his birthday, which was on the 4th of August. He was born in 1912, and soon it will be 100 years. So,
Yes.
Anyway, so the
על זה
idea
אני מדבר גם.
because of this idea that this name has so much meaning, and through this name we could get to the whole idea of all the righteous Gentiles, I saw this tremendous meaning and tremendous importance for this law to pass. And
אני יכולה להגיד לכם מי בעד החוק הזה. כל חובה רוסי שאני שנים עובדת וכותבת על ראול ולנברג, בגלל גם המות הטרגי שלו, שזה היה על ידי ממשלה רוסית בראשות סטלין. וכשעשיתי את המחקר שלי, אני מצאתי אפיזודה שעד היום לא מבינים את המשמעות של אפיזודה. כי סטלין הציע להחליף את ולנברג לאנשים שברחו מצבא סובייטית. אישה אחת בשוודיה ברחה, שהיא הייתה רופאה בצי הרוסי, ו8 חיילים ברחו בקניגסברג לבעלי ברית נגד הנאצים. וסטלין אמר, הנה, אתם נותנים לנו בחזרה את האנשים האלה, ואני מחזיר את ולנברג. והאפיזודה הזה אני למדתי מאיש שישב 10 שנים בוועדת חקירה ממלכתית רוסית ואני ראיתי דפוסים, לצערי הרב, שאנחנו כל כך מכירים באזור שלנו. להחליף אחד להרבה אנשים. ממשלת שוודיה לא הבינה מה סטלין הציע, ואפשר להבין, בגלל שמדינה דמוקרטית לא יכולה להבין איך מחליפים את הדיפלומט לאנשים ואזרחים של מדינה אחרת. אבל כמו שאני הבנתי, זה לא סתם, זה לא מישהו בדרגה נמוכה שהחליט להרוג את ולנברג ב-47 בכלא של קג"ב בלוביאנקה במוסקבה. זה סטלין בעצמו. אז בגלל זה הוא היה חסיד העולם גם ליהודים, גם לעולם כולו. ושמדינת ישראל עדיין כל כך חלשה בערכים, שלא יכולה להבין את זה, חבל וצר לי מאוד. אבל אני אגיד לך, מיכאל, ולחברי איוב קרא, שעכשיו אני מאוד שמחה, כי לא היו לי חברים בנשק, אחים בנשק, עכשיו יש. וביחד אנחנו נעשה הרבה. ואני אגיד לכם שוולנברג למדינת ישראל לא זר. בשנות ה-30 הוא עבד בחיפה, בבנק הולנדי. אז יש מקום להכניס את האנדרטה של ולנברג בחיפה. בסדר? אז אני מאוד מקווה שאנחנו ביחד יכולים להתמודד ולתרום לזיכרון לאומי של העם היהודי ושל העולם כולו. תודה.
Thank you very much.
My search that I did on the story of Raoul Wallenberg, I wrote out several articles in Russian for the tragic story of Raoul Wallenberg, that he ended his life in a Russian prison, whether in 1947 or whether later. I also came across a very interesting episode that somebody who was on a research committee in Russia for 10 years.
State Investigative Committee.
Sorry, you're right. An investigation committee in Russia, and who was there for 10 years. He told me that there was a possibility that Stalin offered to change Wallenberg for a group of soldiers who had fled to Sweden. Sweden at the time didn't understand, maybe I could add, didn't want to understand so much at the time, the importance of this proposition of Stalin. And because it is clear that Stalin himself was behind the arrest of Wallenberg and behind the murder of Raoul Wallenberg, according to whether he was killed in 1947, I consider it very important also for the Russian world to know what happened. Unfortunately, it's got to be said that today the state of Israel is weak in values and consequently has not yet approved this law. But I'm encouraged from this meeting today that I see that I've got friends here, including Knesset Ben-Ari, the ministers Ayub Kara, and the people who are here, that now we can carry on this enterprise in order to bring Raoul Wallenberg to the forefront.
Marina, I'd like to just add one word. I'm going to be calling you for a meeting sometime soon. I hope that this image that we are going to be shaping, called Wallenberg, will include the Jews who are not considered to be Hasidim Umot Olam, and not only the Jews who rescued Jews, but the Jews who stopped the rescue. Some of our Jewish leaders.
There will be a separate law that we have to make together.
Maybe. Okay, we'll sit down and we talk about it. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Just to
I
add
hope you
one
succeed.
small thing, I think it might be also be there are also some young people in the room here, some students, and it could be that it would be necessary to organise also a public campaign in order that the people of Israel understand, the Knesset of Israel, understand the importance of this law. Because it's right to say that Louise von Dardel, the niece of Raoul Wallenberg, was in Israel 6-7 years ago, and she had a meeting at the time with the Minister of Justice, and she said that basically it's not yet in Israel's priorities, and we have to make sure that that is corrected and it becomes one of Israel's priorities.
Also, we have to make sure that maybe somebody takes Yad Vashem to task why they're not doing this, why we have to do it. Okay, we're moving on. I'd like to call on I'm just listening. I'm going, I guess, maybe Switzerland. Second. I'd like to call on Annika Ben David, okay, the Council of Sweden, I'm sorry, of Sweden, who is representing not only Sweden, but we had met a number of times before about Raoul Wallenberg. Sorry.
חבר הכנסת מיכאל בן ארי, חברת הכנסת רינה סולודקין. Larry and the Jerusalem Working Group, survivors of the Shoah, fellow members of the diplomatic corps, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored and humbled to be here and to greet you today when we together commemorate the fate of my fellow countryman, Raoul Wallenberg. I thank members of Knesset, Minister Kara and Ben-Ari, for hosting this event together with the Jerusalem Working Group, headed by the indefatigable Larry Pfeffer. Larry and the Jerusalem Group have persistently, over many years now, made great efforts to remind us of the heroic acts of Raoul Wallenberg, who fought not only the evils of Nazism, but also became a victim of Stalinism. I am convinced that by helping us to remember Raoul Wallenberg's courage and self-sacrifice when faced with an almost impossible situation, your work will inspire us and make us understand that one person really can make a difference. It's equally imperative today that we as individual human beings have the courage to stand up for those principles we want to protect and to promote. I know, obviously, that this audience does not need a lecture from me about what Raoul Wallenberg did to help tens and tens of thousands of Jews in Budapest from a certain death at the death camp of Auschwitz-Birkenau. But let me just mention his never-failing moral compass and his urge to act without delay. What matters is, in his own words, to save as many human beings as possible, to tear as many as possible out of the murderous claws. These were his own words, and he used whatever unusual and creative working methods he could find to serve this purpose. It included, as you know, designing and issuing Swedish protection passports, Schutzpässe, passports to life, distributing them left and right to people on their way to the death camps, in the brutal marches towards the Austrian border, as well as in the train destined for Auschwitz-Birkenau. He threatened and he bribed until he could free those with Swedish protection passports. He established Swedish houses, which he declared Swedish territory, where Jews could seek refuge behind doors covered by Swedish flags. He established hospitals and soup kitchens for the sick and the starving. When the Nazis threatened to blow up the Budapest ghetto to liquidate 60,000 Jews. He also threatened the Nazi officers with capital punishment after the war for the war crimes that they had committed, and they backed down.
And he was right.
They backed down. The Jews called him their guardian angel. The Nazis called him Judenhund, Jewish dog. He can justly be called the hero of our times. The important thing, as many have pointed out, is not only to admire Raoul Wallenberg, but to be inspired by him. What Raoul Wallenberg stood up for is equally important and valid today. His very name is an appeal from the past to the present, an appeal to us to resist evil and encourage peace, tolerance, and human rights. It tells us that each of us can make a difference, armed only with passion and compassion. Protection and promotion of human rights, which is a cornerstone of Swedish foreign policy, together with security and development, begins with ourselves, at home, at work, at school, at every place where we meet our fellow human beings. Let's try to honor Raoul Wallenberg's memory by living and acting in his spirit.
Thank you very much, Annika. I'd like to call on Deputy Ambassador soldier, I guess, a consular of the Portuguese embassy, Mr. Vasco Avila. And I'd like to say before that one word that we heard the name Wallenberg many times, sometimes Carlos. Very few people heard the name Aristides Sousa Mendes, who saved tens of thousands of us beyond the tremendous debt, and was abandoned by his own government, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. I will try to be brief. Honorable members of the Knesset, Honorable Deputy Minister, Mr. Larry Pfeffer, fellow members of the Diplomatic Corps, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to participate in this initiative in memory of Raoul Wallenberg. As you know, Portugal also has an historic figure which stands out in this context, Aristides Sousa Mendes. He stands out as an example of a citizen who risked everything to help Jewish refugees as well as others, a total of 30,000, of which around 10,000 were Jewish. He paid for this act of insubordination by losing his job, by having his life ruined, and eventually by dying in poverty. But I think he lives on in the memories of those he saved, and as an example of how in the midst of the most terrible moments, some people rise to the occasion and allow humanity and solidarity to prevail. Thank you very much.
We're going to have a change of tempo or change of style, I guess. I'd like to ask my good friend and the Pete Seeger of this movement. Remember the 1960s in America, when things were changing because of Joan Baez and Pete Seeger, and every revolution needs an engine which was based on songs. Also Zionism had that. My friend David Benaruber is going to sing a song that he wrote about Wallenberg. And you can see the words in the handouts that have been given to you near the end.
Thank you very much, Larry. תודה רבה, Larry. מכובדיי, חברי כנסת, דיפלומטים, honorable diplomats and members of the Knesset and general public. I wrote this song back in 1984 when I already began activity on behalf of Raoul Wallenberg. And in fact, in 1987, we were already getting reports when I wrote this song that people were seeing him all over the Gulag. And I had personal testimonies from immigrants who arrived in Israel of meeting him in 1972, in 1987 as well. So we must look into the fact that he lived much longer than the Soviet authorities claimed, that he died in Lubyanka in 1947. And I wrote this song, one of many songs I've written about Raoul Wallenberg and his family, and I'd like to sing this to you. I think you all have the words there. Can you hear? Are you there? Answer please, answer please, answer please, roll. 1,000 eyes pierce the darkness of the Soviet night of shame. 1,000 voices pierce the silence and cry your name, Raoul. We have not forgotten, we shall not forget, until an answer comes and history pays its debt to you, Raoul. Can you hear? Are you there? Answer please. Answer please, Raoul. Let this song surge like an ocean, breaching the Kremlin walls of silence until the Soviet leaders make known the truth. Are you there? Can Answer please, answer please.
Well, the next speaker is going to be a well-known philosopher in Israel and maybe worldwide, Professor Yosef Agassi, a friend. He was a friend of one of the Jewish rescuers, a member of the Knesset, of the first Knesset, a man whose name is not only associated with rescue, but the man who brought arms to Israel when we were fighting for our independence in 1948, a man who tried to convince Ben-Gurion and others that Israel should be set up as a constitutional state, because he was so much impressed by what he saw in America. He's a founder of Etzel, Hillel Kook. He's a close friend of Professor Agassi. So Yosef, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I suppose I should speak in English.
מיכאל, מה אתה חושב?
בסדר, אני מסתדר. יש לי עזרה.
Oh, by the way, I'm sorry, okay, forget. I thought that your speech is in the handouts, it's not, I forgot.
I was told to talk about taking stock. Taking stock is not one of the 613 commandments that Jews are obliged to live by, but it is permeating the whole of the Jewish lifestyle. My father told me on Friday afternoon, between the secular and the sacred, is the right time for a Jew to take stock for the whole week, if not for the whole life of activity. This goes for the individual. In Jewish tradition, there is no national stock taking. This is what is known as Jewish theocracy, which was described in a very important classical book, Jewish Theocracy, by Gershom Weiler in the 80s, a book that was met with enormous hostility in this country because it re-raised the question of the character of this country. The Zionist movement met enormous hostility from the more religious part of the Jewish nation because of the idea of Jewish theocracy, namely the Jews should not do any Jewish politics. The religious Jews who joined Zionism recognized that this was a break, but tried to minimize it and to declare that Zionism is secular, that the earthly return is very different from the divine return, and that it is only due to the enormous difficulties that Jewish people meet at the time. The Orthodox Zionists were glad that Herzl was not a religious Jew and knew very little about Jewish religion. This changed. The ink did not dry over the Declaration of Independence when Rabbi Meir Bar Ilan, after whom Bar Ilan University is named, wrote about the desirability of a theocratic Jewish state, a Jewish state that is ruled by Talmudic law. This recommendation was repeated with much more force by the Israeli Minister of Justice 2 weeks ago and again last week. I wish to make it clear what it means. There is no question that the Talmud made capital punishment impossible, but they did it de facto, not de jure. Legally, Talmudic law still supports capital punishment, and in 4 forms, one of which is stoning. It is inconceivable that a modern state should have on its books even a fictitious law of capital punishment of stoning. So what is going on is a very complex thing, and we are paying very great price for it by discussing inessentials instead of discussing essential matters like what is a liberal nation state and is Israel one, and if not, how Israel should become a normal liberal nation state with nationality and citizenship equal and not being dependent on religion. This idea was invented by Hillel Kook during his stay in the United States during World War II. And when he heard about the disaster of the Holocaust, it was in line of this thought that he put efforts to rescue Jews as prior to his other political interests. The result is that the last Zionist Congress before independence condemned him and his group. The condemnation could not have been for his political idea about independence, because Ben-Gurion, in his keynote address to this Zionist Congress in Basel in 1946, actually adopted his ideas. But he was condemned as a dissident, and his group was condemned without explanation, and the explanation is that they tried to rescue Jews, and that the Jewish establishment and the Zionist establishment in the United States actively sabotaged his activity. This is the skeleton in our cupboard. Bertrand Russell said, if you have a skeleton in a cupboard, it rattles, you have to take it out and bury it with honors, and then things will go back to normal. And Israel has to take back this condemnation. Whether this Knesset or the World Zionist Organization or both should rescind this condemnation, and then we will be at peace to mourn our dead as we should.
Thank you, Professor Agassi. I'd like to add just a few words to the words that you've said. I say it differently, you're a philosopher, I'm just a person. Hillel Kook was a young man, very much like Wallenberg. When Wallenberg got to Budapest, he was in his 20s, I think. Hillel Kook was about 25. He was almost penniless. He, because of his talent and his drive, and because of